Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to address my SOP number 172. It is quite comprehensive, and I'll need to take a number of calls to describe its parts and why we think that they are necessary. So what we have in New Zealand now in the rental arena is we've moved from used to be about 80% of New Zealand homes were owned and occupied by the owner, and about 20% were rentals. That proportion has significantly changed over the last 20 or 30 years to much more of a 60-40 kind of proportion. And this has put renters at a severe disadvantage because the law has been designed around a very narrow set of residential tenancies, mostly in relation to state housing, actually, from way back. And so there hasn't been a significant upgrade in the rights of long-term renters in our law. And we see the effects of that through the failure of our systems, including enforcement by the Tenancy Tribunal, to make sure that rental homes are up to standard and are actually warm and safe and dry for families to live in. This is why we, in part, have such a major problem with poor quality housing, is that our law does not allow for tenants to be able to require landlords to take action. And while we do have the Tenancy Tribunal, for example, that is established for that purpose, tenants, as the proportion of tenants increases and the supply of housing, rental housing, decreases, we know that we don't have enough for everybody who needs it, then tenants become increasingly vulnerable to landlords who are in it for a quick buck, who aren't committed to making sure that they are professional landlords and are doing a good job and maintaining their homes to a high standard. So when it comes to looking at anything like a warrant of fitness approach to New Zealand's housing, rental housing, it's also important to improve the rights of the renting families who are in those homes, so that they can genuinely hold to account their landlords and often property managers for the minimum standards that are set in the law. So, Sir, the first of my amendments under my supplementary order paper is to Clause 6. And Clause 6 is, in the bill is about changes to the tenancy agreements. And there are a number of changes that the government wants to make. I have a number of additions to it. And these additions are about improving. They're a start, they're not the full story, to improving the rights of tenants so they have some ability to hold landlords to account, both for the standards but also to protect their tenancy so that they're not kicked out if they complain about poor quality housing or a landlord's failure to meet the standards. So, Sir, the first of those is that a tenancy agreement must include a statement that when the tenancy terminates, that tenant has the right of renewal. Now, this is particularly important for families. There are many, thousands and thousands of New Zealand families now who will never own a home. They are permanently locked out of the home ownership pathway. So they will always be renting, raising their children from little babies through when they eventually retire. They will always be renting. In those circumstances, it's critical that families are able to secure themselves a long-term tenancy. And in New Zealand, the tenancy agreements are generally for about 12 months. So we don't have the kind of long-term tenancies that you see in other places where renting has been part of the culture for longer, and particularly in places in Europe. So this provision to enable a tenant to have the first right of renewal means that that tenant can stay in their house. If the landlord is wanting to get rid of them because they want to put up the rent or they want to do something else to the house, well, actually, that house is now the home of the tenant. And if it's better for the tenant and their families that they stay in that home, their kids are going to the local schools, they've got access to local work, they have built themselves a life in that community, well, then they should have a right to stay. That's the first change. The second is that the tenancy agreement must include the calculation that the landlord intends to use to increase the rent. Now, one of the major problems that we hear by renters is that their rents are going up every 6 months and they have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. We heard a terrible story, Martima Davidson and I, in Christchurch just last week, of a woman who was renting a home, it had earthquake damage, EQC was finally going in to do the repairs, she had to move out. The landlord told her that if she wanted to move back in, she would have to pay another $250 a week rent. So she is now effectively homeless as a result of the earthquake. And this is complete, but this is because, Mr. Chair, this is because there are no protections for tenants as a result of the earthquake. So this woman and her family are now having to find themselves a new home. So this would at least prevent the landlord from being able to say, well, we're going to massively increase your rent for you to be able to stay, because the rent calculation would have to be set into the tenancy agreement so that tenants know how much rent that they can expect to be paying extra and when that is. Because we would also, under this SOP, restrict the number of times that a landlord can put up the rent, so no more often than once every 12 months. That still seems to me a bit harsh on tenants, but landlords would not be able to then put up their rent more than once every 12 months. And so this gives the tenant certainty, how much it's going to go up by and when it's going to go up by, and they can plan for that. It means they can plan their finances. They know that it's coming, the rent increase. It's not going to come as a surprise. It's not going to come rapidly time after time, and they've got some control over it. So we would also change the tenancy so that it was for a fixed term of 3 years as a default, and that again is to help provide these tenants with greater security, sir. So we are advocating these changes because one of the concerns that does often get raised is that if you have a warrant of fitness, even one as minor and miserable as is in this bill, that tenants' rents will go up. And they need more protection. And there is not sufficient protection. And it is the policy settings to provide sufficient protection is pretty tricky. Like, this is not it's not easy to find a solution to this. So we need to get on the road, the policy road of better protecting tenants' rights so that they can deal with these kinds of changes and make sure that they are secure in their home. So one other thing we would do is get rid of the 42-day notice. Now, there are stories after stories after stories of landlords who issue a 42-day notice to tenants, say, my kid wants to live there, my auntie wants to live there. No such thing is really happening. The tenants have no comeback, but they get, 42 days notice to leave their home. These are people's homes. If you're a landlord, you own the house. If you live there, it's your home. And we need to make sure that people are warm and safe and dry and secure in the homes that they are raising their families in. So there is a very significant list of what a comprehensive warrant of fitness would look like. Now, this is a list that comes directly from the research that was prepared by the recipient of the Prime Minister's Science Award. So I have a great deal of confidence, and clearly the Prime Minister has a great deal of confidence in the research and the skill and the veracity of this warrant of fitness list, given it came from someone who, Philippa Howden-Chapman, who was the recipient of the Prime Minister's Science Prize. And I think this would be a great way, if we agreed to this list in this bill, a great way to recognise just not only her skill as a scientist, but actually the work that she does. So there's some basic things in here because they are not provided in the law. Adequate cooking facilities. Now, those of us who live in our own home or have had the benefit of high quality rents might not think that that's important, but last night I was told a story by a group of students who said that their land agent refused to replace their stove and all they had to cook on was a gas element and a skillet for 12 months because the land agent said that it was a non-essential item and refused to replace their stove. Now, you can say, well, they should go to the Tenancy Tribunal, but then they risk losing their home because they have no security of tenure. So you can't expect people in very vulnerable situations to hold landlords to account for this if they have to argue their case before a tribunal. We have to make it mandatory that the basics are provided. Adequate food preparation and storage areas, potable water. There is no requirement in the law for potable water, for drinking water, to be in the home. Hot water. There's no requirement in the law for that. A functional toilet, a bath or a shower. There is no existing requirement in law for those. So fixed space heating is also in this list, and it is essential. It has to be adequate for the house. One of the critical issues we found from the Emilita Bourne tragedy was that this was a home that had a fixed space heater in it. but it was in the lounge in a two-storey cold concrete block house, two-terrace house. And so the heating got nowhere except, Mr Chair?
John O'Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just rise to take